welcome back to another class as part of our Introduction to Entrepreneurship series. So this little program we're doing with 10 classes, and we're already on class 5. So today we're going to talk about a minimum viable product, often shortened to MVP, which is the first real step where an idea meets reality. So as you remember, until this point, everything that we discussed, market research, customer understanding, and business models, they existed mostly in theory. So the MVP is where entrepreneurs begin testing whether their idea actually works in the real world. So an MVP is not a finished product and is not meant to be perfect. So many people imagine that they must build something complete before they show it to their customers, but that is not true. So the MVP is intentionally small and simple because its purpose is learning and not perfection. So it allows entrepreneurs to test their most important assumption very quickly and safely. So for example, instead of building a full mobile app that costs time and money, an entrepreneur might start with a simple web page describing the idea and then see whether people sign up. And that small test can reveal whether real interest exists before you start investing heavily in it. So the key idea behind an MVP is reducing risk. So instead of guessing whether customers will like something, then entrepreneurs collect real evidence. And this prevents building something that nobody wants. And it also saves, of course, time, money, and your emotional energy. So in this lecture, we're going to focus how to build, test, and learn using MVPs. So you don't need advanced technology or big investment to create an MVP. What you need is clarity, curiosity, and willingness to learn from real feedback. So with that mindset, I want you to move with me through this lecture today. So first of all, why an MVP matters in the first place? Well, it matters because good ideas alone are not enough. So many business ideas sound good in theory, but reality is often very different. So customers, they behave differently than expected, and markets react in unpredictable ways. You probably have experience with this even when you have been the customer. An MVP helps reveal this reality early, and earlier rather than later. So one of the biggest risks in entrepreneurship is building something that nobody needs. So entrepreneurs sometimes spend months or years developing products before discovering that there is little demand. So MVP kind of prevents this by testing the idea quickly with minimal resources. So for example, if you want to open a restaurant and you don't test it first, whether customers in the area want, that type of food, then that would be very risky. So a simpler MVP approach could be offering small pop-up meals or some trial deliveries to see if there is demand for that particular food in your town, in your region. And in that way, MVP also saves resources. So time, money, and effort, all of those are limited, especially in early stages of a business. So instead of investing heavily upfront, entrepreneurs learn step by step. So this reduces waste and also increases efficiency. And most importantly, MVP builds confidence through evidence. So instead of just hoping that something will work, entrepreneurs observe real behavior. So the decisions become clearer and also less stressful when they are based on real feedback. So I always tell my students it's the same way as when you write an assignment, and even better, an assignment outline. And you send that outline to your professor to check and you receive feedback on it. So that is a way for you to understand that where you're headed with the assignment, that you're on the right track. So this is very similar. So you develop MVP and you put it out there and you collect feedback in order to improve it. Maybe you'll have to completely start over. The possibilities are endless. But You are not going to invest everything you have into the final product without knowing that there is demand for it out there. So if you remember in the previous lecture, we discussed business models. So how a business creates and delivers value. However, a business model is still a plan. So the MVP is actually the first real test of that plan. So it's turning the theory into practice. So a business model includes assumptions, such as customers needing the solution, finding value in it, and being willing to pay. So those are all things we discussed last week. And these assumptions, they're just assumptions. They're not facts until they are tested. So the MVP, it allows entrepreneurs to test the most important assumption first. So if your business model assumes that customers will pay for online tutoring, then your MVP might be offering a few paid sessions manually to see if people actually purchase those sessions. So as you see, that small experiment, it tests the real behavior of your potential customers. And this way, the MVP helps identify weaknesses early. So perhaps customers like the idea, but they do not want to pay. And perhaps they misunderstand the value. So these insights are extremely valuable before you start scaling. So in simple terms, the business model explains how the business should work. So that's what we talked about last week. And then the MVP checks whether it actually works. So the actual reality. And that connection between planning and testing is very essential in entrepreneurship. So an MVP is the smallest possible version of a product or service that still delivers value to customers. So it focuses only on the core function. So actually the main problem being solved. And everything else, like any decorative functions, anything else, is secondary. So the purpose of the MVP, as I already mentioned, is learning. So entrepreneurs, they want to understand whether customers care about the solution, whether they use it, and whether they're willing to pay. So the MVP is a tool for discovery. And many people misunderstand MVP and think that it means that it has to be low quality. That is not correct. So an MVP should still provide real value, even if it is simple. So simple doesn't equal low quality. So it should still solve the core problem clearly. So for example, if you are talking about a delivery service, then the first version of a delivery service might involve manual coordination using simple tools rather than the complex software in which you have to invest a lot of money. As you know, softwares are very expensive. So even though the manual coordination is basic and simple, it is still delivering value. So it's getting the items delivered. And it's very important to understand the difference that the MVP is not the final product. So it's just the beginning of a learning process. So of course, over time, improvements will be made based on real feedback and not on guesses. So an MVP and a final product, they serve different purposes. So the MVP is built for testing and learning, as we have just identified. And the final product is built for scaling and long-term use. And if you confuse the two stages, it will often lead to wasted effort. So the MVP is intentionally imperfect. So it will lack features, it will lack design polish, and also lack automation most of the time. And that is all very normal. So the goal is to test the main value and not to impress your customers with perfection at that stage. On the other hand, the final product is more refined. So it includes the improvements, the stability, and also the scalability. However, remember that all of that comes after validation through MVP testing. So for example, Many successful digital platforms, they started with very simple versions. And maybe you were a customer on some platform that was new, and you can remember that it was very simple at first. So I have an example here. So there is a university that is starting an academic journal, and their first version of the digital platform was very simple. You could just submit the article, eventually it would get published, but it looked very, very simple. And now, as they are developing it, it's getting all of these additional features and it's getting very pretty. So, in simple words. So, they tested the demand first and then improved gradually. So, they had waited for perfection at the first stage. They might have never launched the platform in the first place. So, understanding this difference, it reduces pressure if you're an entrepreneur. So, entrepreneurs do not need to build everything at once. So they need to start small, they need to learn, and then they, of course, need to improve step by step. So many of my students ask, why do entrepreneurs use an MVP? So they use it because it helps them avoid building the wrong thing. So that's the simple reason why. So many ideas, as you know also from yourself, they seem strong at the beginning, but if you don't test them, it's impossible to know how your customers will react. So the MVP allows entrepreneurs to check whether their idea works before they start investing too much of their time, of course, their money, and also their effort. And one major advantage of MVP is reducing waste. So instead of spending months building a complex product, entrepreneurs, they start with a simple version and they learn quickly. So if something doesn't work, they adjust early rather than fixing large problems later. So if someone is planning an online course, they might first offer a short live session instead of recording a full course. And that small step tests whether people are interested and whether the topic is valuable. And if nobody signs up, then the entrepreneur learns quickly without large loss. And MVP also improves decision making. So entrepreneurs rely less on guessing and more on real evidence. And that reduces emotional stress and increases clarity about what to do next. So personally, I come from the science background, so I always like to look at real evidence instead of, just guessing and assumptions. So when you know that what you're doing next is grounded in real evidence and real customer feedback, it reduces the stress that you're having, the reason why you can't sleep at night, regarding, your money, what you're investing, your time and your effort. So you have that clarity about what you're going to do next, how you're going to improve. Maybe there are small adjustments to make, maybe there are big ones, but all of that can be solved if you know what is the feedback and the evidence. Without that, you're just going to be guessing and assuming, which of course, if you are, the creator of a certain product, and especially if it was your idea in the first place, you are very biased about it. So you think that everybody will think it's a great idea and everybody will need it. But unfortunately, that is not always true. So this is why you need that feedback. And last but not least, MVP encourages action. So instead of overthinking and waiting for any perfect conditions, entrepreneurs begin testing. So learning begins only when something is tested in reality. So remember that. I know that a lot of times, especially, your product, your idea, it's kind of like your baby. So you want to get it perfect. You want these perfect conditions before you release it to anybody to see or use. But nothing is perfect. So I always tell my students, we don't live in utopia. We don't have a perfect world. So we can only learn when we are testing it in reality and we're collecting that feedback and the evidence. So don't aim for perfection from the beginning. And talking about the core idea of MVP, it's actually very simple. Start small, learn fast, and improve gradually. So instead of building everything at once, entrepreneurs focus only on the most important part. So the core value of the idea. So many new entrepreneurs, they try to include too many features at the beginning. And that often leads to delays, confusion, and of course, wasted resources. MVP, it teaches focus. Only what is necessary to test the idea, only that is going to be included. So if the core value is helping people save time, then the MVP should demonstrate that time saving very clearly, even if everything else is basic. So fancy design or extra features, they're not needed at this stage. And MVP also promotes flexibility. So when the version is small and simple, then those changes that you need to make, they're going to be easier and cheaper. So entrepreneurs can adapt based on feedback without needing to rebuild everything. And the purpose is, again, not to launch perfectly, but to learn quickly. So speed of learning is always more valuable than completeness in the early stages. So please remember that. And every business idea is built on assumptions. We learned this in the previous 4 classes. So entrepreneurs, they assume that customers exist, that the problem is real, that their solution helps, and also the customers will be willing to pay. So all of those are assumptions or guesses. And the assumptions, they feel true, especially, as I said, if it's your idea, you might be very biased about it. But they are not fact until they are tested and proven. So the MVP is then designed to test those assumptions one by one. And instead of guessing, entrepreneurs observe real customer behavior. And that helps separate reality from imagination. So for example, an entrepreneur might assume the customers want premium version of a service. An MVP could test this by offering a simple paid version and then observing whether people actually pay. And sometimes assumptions are confirmed and sometimes they're not. So both outcomes are valuable. That's important to remember. So people think that sometimes if an assumption is not confirmed, that means failure. No, it doesn't mean that. Remember that anything, even a mistake or a weakness, it can be used as knowledge, and it's a part of the learning. So again, I like to always compare to my students. It's the same as when you're writing a university assignment. You won't always score 100%, and whatever were your weak sides in the assignment, you take the feedback and you fix it for next time. So this is the same thing. Confirmed assumptions will, of course, increase your confidence, but the rejected assumptions, they will prevent any larger mistakes later. So again, it's the same thing with the university assignment. When you get, really good grades and really positive feedback, you have increased confidence as a student. But then you have some weak spots and maybe some points that you wrote in your assignment weren't so good, so you got worse feedback. And that prevented you from making the same mistakes again in your future assignments and dissertations. So understanding assumptions, it helps entrepreneurs stay realistic. So the goal is not to prove yourself right, but to actually discover the truth. And then comes the big question. So what do we test first? So when building an MVP, entrepreneurs should focus on testing the most risky assumption first. So this is usually the assumption that could cause the entire idea to fail if it's wrong. And testing smaller details first can waste time. So often the most important thing to test is whether customers care about the solution at all. So think about it. If customers, they're not interested, then improving features will not fix the problem. So you need to kind of aim at the bigger picture. So does this solution, is it even wanted by the customers in the first place? So if you're about to build a complex app, then you might test whether people sign up for the idea using a simple landing page. And if the interest is low, then it signals a deeper issue with the value proposition in the first place. And testing customer willingness to pay is also very important. So interest, of course, is one thing, but payment shows real value. So MVP, it helps reveal that difference. So there might be something that as a customer that I would want as a solution to my problem. But when I find out the price, I'm not going to be willing to pay for it because I will think that it just value wise, it doesn't add up. So these are the two most important things. So we need to see if our customers even want our solution and then if they want to pay for that solution. And when you test these most critical assumptions first, then you reduce uncertainty faster and make better decisions about the next steps for your product. So the MVP is fundamentally a learning tool. So I've been using the word learning regards to the MVP. So its purpose is not to create a perfect product, but to gather the real world feedback. And you, as an entrepreneur, you should view MVP as an experiment and not a finished solution. So again, as I always like to give my examples regarding my students, so think of it as an experiment that you did in school, maybe in the chemistry lab or the biology lab. So you often had an experiment that you had to redo multiple times until you got to the actual finished point and the finished product, whatever you were trying to get through the experiment. So this is the same way. And learning in this case, it comes from observing the real behavior. So what customers say can be helpful, but what they do is more important. So do they sign up? Do they return? Do they pay? All of those behaviors, they provide real signals. So for example, your customers might say that they like the idea, but then never use it. So obviously that behavior reveals a gap between the interest and the real value. And MVP, it will help uncover such gaps earlier rather than later. And as you as students probably know, learning also comes from mistakes. So if customers are confused or they're not interested, that is not a failure. It's information. So each insight improves the next version. So always treat whatever goes wrong, whatever is like a mistake of yours, as information to improve and again learn, make something better. And entrepreneurs who treat MVP as a learning cycle, they become more adaptable. So instead of seeking that perfection that I was talking about, they actually seek understanding and information. And that mindset is key to long-term success as an entrepreneur. And there's no single way to build an MVP. So depending on the idea and the type of your business, entrepreneurs can actually create different kinds of MVPs. And the goal is always the same: test the core value with minimal effort and learn from the real users. So some MVPs, they focus on a physical product, while others will focus on a service or a digital solution. And in many cases, entrepreneurs start with something very simple and then gradually make it more advanced as they learn more. So for example, a product-based business might start with a basic prototype, while a service business might begin by offering a few trial sessions manually. So both are very valid MVP approaches because both are testing real value. And the type of MVP, it depends on what assumption needs testing. So if the assumption is about customer interest, then a simple landing page may be enough. And if the assumption is about usability, then a working prototype may be needed as well. So understanding that MVP can take many forms, it helps entrepreneurs avoid overcomplicating things. And the best MVP is actually the simplest one that provides real learning. So that is usually what I tell my students to take away from my class about MVPs. So the simplest version that provides the real learning. That's what an MVP should be and should provide. So talking about a product MVP, it is the simplest version of a physical or a digital product that still delivers the core benefit. So it usually includes only essential features and avoids unnecessary complexity. So a hardware startup might create a basic prototype, using simple materials instead of manufacturing a polished product. And this allows testing whether customers actually find the solution useful. So as I said, the broader picture, is it even useful at all? And in digital products, a product MVP may be a basic version of an app or a website, like I said, with only one main function. So if the core feature solves the problem, then the idea is validated, even if any of those other secondary features that are more decorative and additional are still missing at this stage. And product MVPs, they help entrepreneurs understand usability. So do customers understand how to use it? Does it solve the intended problem? And do they find value in it? So again, the goal is not perfection, but it's functionality. So if the product demonstrates value clearly, then it is a successful MVP, regardless of simplicity. Then a service MVP focuses on testing a service idea in a simple and direct way. So instead of building a full business structure, entrepreneurs offer a limited version of the service to a small group of customers. So for example, if you're planning to launch coaching services, you might start by offering a few free or low-cost sessions. And this helps test whether people find the service useful and whether they're willing to continue with it. And a cleaning service entrepreneur might personally serve a few clients before they even start hiring staff or building any systems. And that allows learning about customer expectations and pricing. So you see, everything is centered around learning for MVPs. And service MVPs are powerful because they involve real interaction with customers. So entrepreneurs can observe reactions, gather feedback, and refine the offering very quickly. And starting small also reduces risk. So instead of investing heavily in infrastructure, entrepreneurs learn through direct experience. And digital MVPs, they are of course very common today because they are relatively fast and also inexpensive to build. So they help test online products, services, or platforms with minimal resources. And one simple digital MVP is a landing page. So this is a single web page, as I gave the example about the journal website, explaining the idea and inviting users to sign up. So if people register, it signals that there's interest in the solution. And another example is a basic version of an app or a software with only one core feature. So even a clickable prototype that simulates functionality can provide useful feedback. And digital MVPs help test demand, usability, and engagement. So entrepreneurs can observe how users interact, where confusion occurs, and what features matter most. And the advantage of digital MVPs is flexibility. So they can be updated very quickly based on feedback and making learning faster through that. Then talking about the manual first approach, it means doing things manually before building automation or any technology. So maybe you've heard, maybe you've read about different startups. Many successful startups, they began this way because it reduces cost and it increases learning. So for example, before building a delivery app, entrepreneurs might coordinate deliveries manually using simple tools like messaging and maybe spreadsheets. So that tests demand and logistics without any heavy automation or technology investment. So these manual first MVPs help entrepreneurs understand real challenges. So automation built too early, it may solve the wrong problem. And manual work reveals what actually needs improvement. So this approach also strengthens customer understanding because, as you know, direct interaction, it helps entrepreneurs observe needs, frustrations, and behaviors closely, something that technology and automation cannot do. I'll give you again an example. When you purchase something online, you often get like a feedback form and they ask you, how was your experience? And sometimes when you click that it wasn't so good, it takes you to a chatbot. So it's a robot, just a chat person answering to you. It's not a person, it's a AI. And when you have a frustration, it's giving you certain answers that you can click, and it doesn't allow you to express your deep concern because it won't understand you. It's just an automation, it's an automated system, it's a robot. And at the very beginning, such feedback is not useful. So if your customers can just tell you out of a choice of multiple choice, I don't know, out of five options, what is wrong or what they don't like, they won't be able to express those details that you will need in order to improve your product. So this is why that direct approach, the direct interaction and asking for detailed feedback and actually listening to your customer is much more valuable. And this is why manual first reminds that learning is more important than any speed or sophistication in those early stages. And once your concept is validated, then you can introduce, of course, automation gradually, because that will ensure that technology is supporting the real needs rather than, again, your assumptions. Because if I, again, go back to that, automated robot who answers and takes your feedback, that is, again, based on the product designers and creators' assumptions, because they put in, for example, those five choices of maybe what you didn't like about their product. And those five bad things that I named, those are the ones that they assumed, the ones they already know. But what if you don't like something else about it? What if something else frustrated you? So these are things that shouldn't be introduced as biases or any assumptions. They should collect the real feedback from the real customers. And we've been talking about customer feedback, so it is one of the most important parts of the MVP process. So the purpose of building an MVP is not just to launch something, but to actually learn how real customers respond. So feedback, it helps entrepreneurs understand whether the solution is useful, clear, and of course, valuable. So feedback, as you know, it can come in many forms. So customers, they may share opinions directly, but as entrepreneurs, you should also observe behavior. So do customers use the product? Do they return to you? Do they recommend it to others? And as you know, actions can always reveal more than words. So for example, customers might say that they like the product, but if they stop using it very quickly, then that indicates a deeper issue. So perhaps the value is unclear, or maybe the solution does not fit their needs. So an MVP helps uncover those gaps early. And entrepreneurs should treat feedback as information, not as criticism. So negative feedback is especially valuable because it highlights areas for improvement. Again, same as for you in your university assignments. When your professor grades your assignment, whatever was negative feedback or maybe a weakness in what you wrote, it's actually the most valuable because that is where you can improve next time you submit the assignment. And avoiding feedback, it slows the learning process and it increases risk. So again, the goal is understanding and not approval. And entrepreneurs who listen carefully and adapt based on feedback, they build stronger and more relevant solutions than those who don't. And the question is, how do we collect feedback? So again, collecting feedback, it doesn't require any complex tools. So simple and direct methods are often the most effective, especially in the early stages. So entrepreneurs should focus on honest and clear responses rather than large quantities of data. And one common method is customer interviews. So when you speak directly with your users, it helps them uncover thoughts, experiences, and frustrations in detail. And open-ended questions encourage deeper insights. So what I was telling you, those deeper emotional frustrations. Of course, surveys can also be useful, especially for gathering structured feedback. So short and simple surveys, they often produce better responses than any long and complicated ones. And observation is, of course, another powerful method. So watching how customers interact with MVP, it reveals usability issues, confusion, or any unexpected behavior. So reviews, comments, and informal conversations, they also can provide valuable insight. And the key is always consistency. Feedback should be collected regularly and not only once. So customer feedback reveals whether the MVP truly solves the intended problem, and it shows whether customers understand the value and whether the solution fits their needs at all. So feedback often highlights pain points that were not obvious to you before. Customers may maybe struggle with certain steps, misunderstand some features, or maybe find parts of the solution unnecessary. So users might find the tool helpful, but confusing to navigate. I think many of us have experienced that, especially with, mobile apps or maybe some website platforms. So that indicates that value exists, but usability needs improvement. And such insights, they guide development priorities. Then, of course, feedback also reveals emotional responses. So do customers feel satisfied, relieved, or confident? And all those emotional signals, they help measure real impact beyond technical performance. And most importantly, feedback helps entrepreneurs decide what to keep, what to improve, or what to even remove. And that turns assumptions into actionable insights. Then there's the term iteration, which means improving the MVP step by step based on what you have learned. So instead of making large changes at once, entrepreneurs make small adjustments and then observe the results. And this reduces risk and improves clarity. So each iteration should focus on a specific improvement, such as usability, value clarity, or pricing. So small focus changes, they make it easier to understand what works. So for example, if customers are confused about how to use a certain feature, then the next version may simplify the interface. And if customers hesitate to pay, then pricing or communication may be adjusted. And iteration, it's continuous. So even successful MVPs, they require refinement. And learning never stops because customer needs and markets, they evolve over time. And entrepreneurs should view iteration as progress, not as correction. So each change brings the product closer to real customer needs. And then there's the build, measure, learn cycle, which is the core process behind MVP. So first, entrepreneurs build a simple version of the product. Then they measure how customers respond. And third, they learn and adjust based on results. So this cycle, it encourages continuous improvement. So instead of waiting for perfect conditions, entrepreneurs test early and often. So each cycle provides new insights. And measuring includes observing usage, engagement, and willingness to pay. So these indicators, they show whether the value proposition is working. And learning, it means interpreting results and deciding what to change. So entrepreneurs, they may improve the product, adjust the business model, or test a different assumption. And repeating this cycle, it builds knowledge and confidence. And over time, the product, it becomes stronger and more aligned with customer needs. But the point is that you go through this cycle multiple times. You don't just go through it once and stop there. So it's going to be a repetition. And sometimes an MVP does not produce the results that an entrepreneur hoped for. And customers may show little interest, they may not use the product, or maybe they're not willing to pay. And this situation can, of course, feel discouraging. But again, it's a valuable learning moment. So an MVP can fail for several reasons. The problem may not be important enough for customers. The value proposition may be unclear. Maybe the solution doesn't match customer needs. Or maybe customers don't understand how to use it. So again, if I give an example, an entrepreneur might build a scheduling tool, assuming that people want more planning features, but customers may actually want simplicity. So the issue is not the effort that is being invested, but the mismatch between the solution and the So when an MVP fails, the key question is, what did we learn? So entrepreneurs should analyze feedback and behavior very carefully because failure reveals which assumption was incorrect. And instead of seeing failure as the end, entrepreneurs should actually treat it as a direction. So early failure, it prevents larger losses later and guides improvement or change. So again, remember that you treat this whole process as learning. And failure in the MVP stage is useful because it reveals reality very quickly. So without testing, entrepreneurs might continue investing in the wrong idea for a long time. So early failure actually saves time, money, and effort. And failure also improves clarity. So it helps entrepreneurs understand customer behavior more deeply. And often failure reveals that the real problem is different from what was originally assumed. And again, giving you an example, a product might fail because customers do not trust it yet. So that suggests that building credibility and not changing the product may be the next step. And failure also strengthens decision making. So entrepreneurs become less emotional and more analytical at that stage. So they learn to rely on evidence rather than assumptions. And most successful businesses experienced early failures. So the difference is that they learned and adapted instead of giving up. So failure is part of the entrepreneurial process and it's not an exception. So there will always be some type of failure. We need to be ready for that. Otherwise, don't take the risk and don't become an entrepreneur. So failure is a part of the process. There will always be some setbacks, there will always be some issues, but again, all of it can be viewed as learning to then move forward with improvements. And one major advantage of MVP is cost control. So instead of investing heavily in the full development, as we already discussed today, entrepreneurs start with a simple version that requires fewer resources. And that, of course, reduces financial risk. So many startups fail because they spend too much before validating demand. An MVP encourages testing cheaply and gradually, increasing investment only when validation already exists. So for example, instead of building a full online store, an entrepreneur might first sell products through a simple social media page. And this tests the demand without any large setup costs. And cost control also helps entrepreneurs stay flexible. So when less money is invested upfront, changes are easier to make without major loss. So financial discipline is very important in these early stages. And MVP supports sustainable growth by ensuring that spending follows learning. Like I said, learning always at the center, and that it doesn't follow your assumptions. And of course, MVP also improves time efficiency. So instead of spending long periods planning and building, entrepreneurs test ideas quickly. So this speeds up the learning and decision making. And time is a critical resource in entrepreneurship. So delays, they often increase uncertainty and reduce momentum. So MVP allows entrepreneurs to move forward faster. And fast learning helps entrepreneurs adapt quickly to changes in the customer needs or also market conditions. And this agility is a competitive advantage. And again, the goal is, of course, not rushing, but efficient learning. So MVP ensures that time is spent on discovering what truly matters. And the term customer validation, it means confirming that real customers value the solution that you're proposing. And again, interest alone is not enough. So true validation happens when customers actually use the product, when they return to the product, and that they're willing to pay for the product. And behavior is more reliable than opinion. So customers may say that they like something, but real value is shown through action. So MVP helps observe those behaviors clearly. So many people, they may express interest in a product, but only a few may actually purchase the product. And that difference, it reveals the strength of the value proposition. And customer validation builds confidence. So entrepreneurs know that they are solving a real problem and not just their, imagined one or the one that they assumed. And validated learning guides the next steps. For example, improving your product, refining your pricing, or preparing you for scaling. And talking about common MVP mistakes, so many entrepreneurs, they misunderstand the purpose of an MVP and they make some avoidable mistakes. So one of the most common mistakes is building too much too early. So instead of focusing on that core value that we discussed today, they try to create a nearly complete product, which defeats the purpose of an MVP. Another mistake is waiting too long to launch. So some entrepreneurs, they delay testing because they want everything to be perfect. And this slows learning and of course increases risk. So the MVP should be simple and released early. And another big problem is ignoring feedback. So entrepreneurs, they sometimes become emotionally attached to their idea and they resist change. However, as I said, feedback is the main reason for building an MVP. So if you ignore it, it wastes the opportunity to learn. And then some entrepreneurs also focus too much on opinions instead of behavior. So customers may say they like something, but what matters is whether they use it or pay for it. So observing actions is then more reliable than listening to words alone. And avoiding these mistakes, it helps entrepreneurs learn faster and build stronger solutions. So the MVP is not about perfection, but again, it's about clarity and about learning. And an MVP and a prototype, they are related, but they are different tools. So a prototype is usually a model or representation of a product idea. And we're going to talk about prototypes more in our future classes. So it may show how something looks or functions, but it does not always provide real value. And an MVP, on the other hand, is a working version that customers can actually use. So it delivers the core benefit and allows entrepreneurs to observe real customer behavior. So for example, a prototype of an app, it might show screens and interactions without any real functionality. But an MVP would allow users to perform the core action, even if other features are still missing. So prototypes are useful for testing design and usability concepts, but MVPs are useful for testing the value and demand. So both can be used at different stages. And understanding the difference, it helps entrepreneurs choose the right tool. So when the goal is learning from real users, then MVP is the stronger approach. And market fit means that the product truly matches customer needs. So customers find real value, they use the product regularly, and they're willing to continue. So MVP helps test whether market fit exists. And without market fit, scaling a product becomes difficult. So marketing and promotion, they cannot compensate for a weak value proposition. Customers must genuinely find the solution useful. So signs of market fit include consistent usage, positive feedback, and willingness to pay. So these signals show that the solution solves a meaningful problem. And achieving market fit takes time and iteration. So MVP helps entrepreneurs move toward this goal gradually and, of course, realistically. And a good MVP produces clear signals about customer response. So one important signal is, of course, interest. So do customers engage with the idea? Do they sign up or do they inquire? So do customers actually use the solution after their continued use actually suggests real value? And of course, willingness to pay is a strong signal. So when customers pay, it shows that the value is meaningful to them. So payment is stronger evidence than positive comments alone. And positive feedback and recommendations are, of course, also useful signals. So customers who share their experience indicate, their satisfaction and trust. And entrepreneurs, they should look for patterns, not just isolated events. So consistent signals across multiple users indicate stronger validation. And improvement should happen after learning and not before testing. So many entrepreneurs try to perfect the product before receiving feedback, which then delays learning. So once feedback reveals what works and what does not, entrepreneurs can then prioritize improvements. So the most important changes are those that strengthen value or remove major pain points. And improvements should be gradual. So large, sudden changes, they can introduce new uncertainty. So small changes allow clearer learning. And the goal is progress, not perfection. So each improvement brings the product closer to real customer needs. And we mentioned scaling. So scaling means growing the business after the core idea has been validated. So the MVP stage comes before scaling because it helps confirm that the solution truly works for customers. And scaling too early can increase risk and waste resources. And when scaling begins, entrepreneurs usually improve the product, increase marketing, and reach more customers. However, this should happen only after clear signals of value and demand are observed during the MVP stage. And many successful companies began with simple MVPs. And these early versions were obviously not perfect, but they allowed founders to test real demand and learn quickly. You might have heard of Dropbox. So instead of building the full product first, the founders actually created a simple video explaining how it would work. And when many people started showing interest, they knew the demand existed before building the technology. And Airbnb also began with a simple MVP. So the founders rented out their own apartment to test whether people were willing to stay in strangers' homes. And that small experiment validated the concept before they started scaling globally. And I already mentioned simplicity. So this is one of the most important principles in MVP development. So a simple MVP is easier to build, easier to test, and of course, easier to improve because complexity often slows learning. So many entrepreneurs add features too early, believing that more features create more value. However, complexity can confuse customers and hide the core benefit. So simplicity also reduces cost and time. So a smaller MVP can be tested quickly and adjustments are much easier to make. So starting simple does not limit your growth, and many large businesses began with very simple MVPs and expanded later on. So focus first and then expand later. And the MVP process requires a specific mindset. So entrepreneurs must be open to learning, flexible, and willing to change direction if necessary. So this mindset is often more important than the technical skills. So first, curiosity is key. So entrepreneurs should constantly ask, what did we learn? What surprised us? What should change? And as you know, learning drives improvement. Then, of course, flexibility. So if evidence shows that assumptions were wrong, adapting is smarter than insisting on the original idea. And humility helps entrepreneurs accept feedback without defensiveness. So the goal is not to be right, but to build something valuable. And of course, action is essential. So MVP encourages doing and testing rather than waiting for perfect conditions. And progress, of course, comes from experimentation. And as we are approaching the end of today's class, I want to just quickly summarize the key takeaways. So the main purpose of the MVP is learning through real-world testing. So instead of guessing, we gather evidence about our customer needs, value, and demand. And starting small reduces risk. So entrepreneurs test ideas with minimal resources before committing heavily. And that saves time, money, and of course, effort. And remember that feedback is essential. So you have to listen to customers and observe behavior. And negative feedback is as valuable as positive feedback. Then also iteration is continuous. So entrepreneurs improve step by step based on what they learned. So progress happens gradually and not instantly. And most importantly, MVP shifts focus from perfection to understanding. So entrepreneurs who learn faster, they build stronger businesses. And with that, we have already had 1 hour together. So thank you very much again for joining. And if there are any questions, we do have a few minutes, so I can take a few questions.
Thank you very, very much, Dr. Abola. Ladies and gentlemen, again, we have experimented with perfection. Although MVP is not about perfection, but what we got from Dr. Paola Abola was a very comprehensive and clear explanation about this MVP, which is a minimum viable product. If we were to summarize the whole presentation with just one sentence, we would simply say that the MVP is a business approach which allows you to test a product to understand market demand, as simple as that. Since, like Dr. Abola put it, we don't have too much time left. Ladies and gentlemen, let's now jump onto your questions. Remember, these classes are designed, intended for you. So it is your time right now. So go ahead, please, either in the chat block or live, and raise your hand and ask questions if you will. This is your time. Remember, the MVP is mostly a tool for discovery, and it reduces waste. It allows you to save time and save money. It allows you to validate customers' demand, and also it helps you to avoid uh, building wrong solutions. The first question, Gracious Shiweche, go ahead. We are listening.
Thank you so much, Doc. Thank you, Doc Paula, for such an insight.
Yeah.
What happened here?
Hello,
All right. All
can you hear
right.
me?
Yes, very
Okay.
well.
Oh, okay. My question was, does this MVP, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes, now I can
yes.
hear you.
Okay, so my question was, does this MVP apply to every kind of product that one would need? For example, suppose
Mhm.
I'm in a farming business. Do I need to do an MVP? Do I need to do uh, prototype or something? Or there's some kind of products or some kind of services that are applicable to MVP and then others are not?
Good
Yeah, that's a good
question.
question. So, yeah. Yeah. So thank you for asking that. So I think that on some scale, it should be applicable to everything. But of course, how you execute it, how you gather the feedback, to what extent you go into, a deeper building than you do at the first steps, that depends on what exactly you're giving. So, of course, in farming business, you cannot just, grow one little crop and then find a little group of customers, right? So it's going to be a larger scale. But still, the idea is the same. Maybe before you start going out and giving it to a larger pool of customers, you can test it and see what is working and what is not. So that idea would still remain as learning being in the center.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abola. I love that question as to whether this type of approach applies to just some areas and not to some others. Thank you very much for your response. Ladies and gentlemen, remember this is your time. We already run out of time, but if you have a question either through the system right now or through the chat block, we would be more than willing to address your questions. But since looking around, I don't see any hand up, and I do understand Dr. Abola's presentation was very, very clear. Every segment was a type of bullet list of details where you could follow her from step 1 to step 2, going to step 4, 5, 6, etc. So I do understand why you have no specific or more questions other than the one raised by Gracious. In the meantime, brothers and sisters, you may also get in touch with Dr. Abola. She has just placed her email address in the chat section. So go ahead and grab that right at this time. As a matter of fact, it is extremely simple and easy. Paola Abola at uj.edu. Did I say it correctly, Dr. Abola?
Yes, that's correct. So
All
I have a
right.
little bit slower internet connection today. And the presentation is very big. It's 64 megabytes. So I'm not able to send it through the chat box, but you can email me and I will send it also to the university administration and it will be placed together with the recording on your website.
Thank you very much. You heard that, brothers and sisters. She could not place the whole document, which is so heavy, in the chat block, but you're still not out of luck, since she will provide the document to the administration of Atlantic International University. And also, our policy is for you to get the document of any session through your tutors. You can contact your tutors as well and request that you be provided with the document. At that stage, we are getting to the end of this top-notch class. Brothers and sisters, I want to say thank you to each and every one of you. And let's go back quickly to Dr. Abola for a conclusion before I allow you to voice your contentment, your happiness with Dr. Abola. A conclusion, please, Doctor.
Yes, thank you very much for joining today's class. It was a pleasure to have you all here. And as you know, we're continuing this course. So next time we're going to talk about branding, marketing, and digital presence, which of course is important in today's businesses. So I look very much to seeing you all next week.
Thank you very much again. It was a blessing having you, Dr. Paola Abola. It was a blessing as well to have each and every one of you in attendance, brothers and sisters. And like I pledged, this is your time right now. All your microphones right at this time are on.
Thank you very much,
Abola.
Dr. Paula.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Paula.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much again. I hope you enjoy a truly blessed day. Bye-bye now. Love you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the listen.